A little warning before you listen to any of these stories. Every single one of these stories is very graphic and goes into detail about gory subjects and dark themes. So if you feel uncomfortable listening to, or have a weak stomach, please quit out this video. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys in the next one. I have never been on the deep web. I think the whole thing sounded pretty stupid, some illicit part of the internet with unknown atrocities lurking in every corner, but I was working on my master's thesis in sociology, and I thought a paper on internet subcultures sounded interesting. I got together with a friend, and he talked to me about Tor and showed me different precautions I could take to protect my identity and my computer while browsing the deep web. I was ready to explore this bizarre hive I had heard so much about. Needless to say, for about 2 weeks I sifted through old websites that looked like they'd been developed during the 90s. Obscure internet relics floating around in the middle of nowhere, derelict websites forgotten by time. Most of it was boring junk, lots of Nazi conspiracy theories, drug traffickers, pedophiles. It was what I expected. I would have been content to do my paper on Nazi subcultures on the deep web, or even maybe pedophiles, but I ran across something that was really interesting to me. It was a forum awkwardly titled Enthusiast of Suicide. The name led me to believe that the forum wasn't of English-speaking origin. The forum itself had a multinational array of boards for users from different countries. I saw boards in Spanish, French, Turkish, Chinese, a vast array of boards, but there was always one common theme. Everyone on the boards was fanatically obsessed with suicide. People on the English-speaking boards would share different ideas about suicide, how to execute it, how to lessen the pain for people who were afraid of suffering, stories about friends who had committed suicide, suicide fetishists sharing explicit pictures with one another, people having philosophical discussions about suicide. It didn't seem to stop. Then on one of the boards, I noticed some of the people talking about something called The Suicide Show. "It's on tonight. Are you gonna watch it?" one would say. "No, I can't. I have a big day tomorrow. I plan on going into my work with a .38 caliber and killing my boss. Then I'm gonna kill myself." The others would respond, and I cringed at reading this. The Suicide Show? If it was what it sounded like, then it would be some kind of webcast with a bunch of people committing suicide. I felt my stomach turn, and my palms were sweaty, but my mind was racing with curiosity. This suicide cult had already given me enough material for an exciting thesis, but this would be the coup de grace. I found out the show came on at 1 in my area, and I fished around until I could find a link to the show. My throat had a huge knot sitting in it, and I know I must have been very sweaty, but I couldn't let my nerves get in the way of my research. I was doing some important work here. The live feed came on with an eerie-sounding MIDI playing in the background. The film quality was grainy, as if filmed using a cell phone or a cheap camera. A woman with the microphone held tightly in both hands stood with a forced smile on her face. I could see her mascara run down on her face, as if she had been crying. She looked to be maybe in her 40s. She was Asian, and she looked incredibly uncomfortable and afraid. I gripped the armrest of my chair, my nails digging into it. She made me uneasy. The whole thing made me uneasy. But this was getting much more strange. She started speaking in a foreign language, so I quickly clicked a button that would display English subtitles on the screen. "Welcome to the Suicide Show. I'll be your host this evening," she said, her pitch shaky and unnerved. Just the sound of her frightened voice made this so much more surreal and slightly nauseating. "Let's start the show," she shouted with an uneasy and forced glee. She threw an arm up in the air, her teeth clenched tightly into a nervous smile, and a tear rolling down from one eye. This had to be fake. It was weird, but there was no way I was honestly about to privy to what I thought I was gonna witness. They tried hard to convince me that this was some illicit game show from hell, that this woman was being held against her will, like Vanna White at gunpoint. But I wasn't biting. There's no way this was really happening. Our first contestant is from New York. His name is Robert Howard. She read from a cue card nervously, looking up at the camera with wild eyes. She then lowered the card. I could see her hand shaking, and the compulsory toothy smile flash again as she lifted her hand to the air. A spotlight highlighted the area around a man sitting in a chair. He had a shotgun in his hands. I felt my nails dig deeper into my armrest. I clenched my teeth and watched on in horror. He lifted the shotgun to his mouth. I saw tears running from his eyes, and he fired. I could see the inside of his mouth light up for a brief second as a shot rang out, startlingly loud. I jerked in my chair from the sound of the blast. I saw his head jerk back briefly as a discharge of brain and blood hit the wall behind him. His head then lurched forward, his upper body slumped ahead, folding in on itself, his head dangling. I could see the blood and the gore, and I could see smoke wafting from where the blast had penetrated. I had seen plenty of horror movies, and I had seen plenty of gore on the internet to know the difference. I placed a hand on my mouth. I felt the air vacate my lungs as I stared in abject horror. "Judges?" the woman cried out, throwing her arm as the cheap camera swung around to highlight 3 people sitting at a table. They wore black masks with zippers that formed smiles for mouths, and white tape that formed X's over their eyes with small punctures in them so they could see the show. One judge held up a 3.8, the other a 4.0, and the last judge held up a 3.5. Our next contestant is Carlos Riviera of Los Angeles, she said, moving on to the next man. This man stood still, wearing no shirt and a simple pair of jeans. He was holding something in his right hand, and his head was hanging low. He looked like he was focusing, concentrating on something, trying to steel himself. He gritted his teeth, clenching them tightly, his body shaking, and suddenly started to yell furiously as he brought a butcher's knife up to his neck and started slicing across his throat. The knife cut coarsely through the skin, ripping through the flesh, but he didn't get across his entire throat before he fell to his knees and grabbed his gullet with his hands. I saw blood spurting all over the floor, gushing outward from the open wound. His eyes were lit up with fear as he choked on his own blood. "Look at him gush," the woman cried out, her voice a mixture of false enthusiasm, panic, and something akin to disgust. He collapsed into a pile on the floor, his legs kicking as he struggled to breathe. "Judges?" the woman said again, the camera swinging around once more. The judges held up a 4.8, 4.9, and 4.7 respectively. There were 2 other contestants, but I couldn't watch anymore. I closed the feed and walked over to my window. I had to catch my breath. My heart was racing. What had I just seen? I didn't sleep that night. I could see the man who slit his throat. I could see his eyes as he struggled to breathe through a throat full of his own blood. I could see his bloody hands clasping at his neck in a combination of instinct and regret. I could see him kicking on the floor, laying sideways in a pool of his own blood. Every time I closed my eyes, it's all I saw. Needless to say, I dropped the paper on Suicide Enthusiast. The shadow web. I see a lot of people interested in the deep web these days, mainly teens. People talking about red doors and many other alternative names to things they think that are real, but haven't seen themselves. People question this every day. Are these red doors real? Do they really happen? They are very real indeed. Unfortunately, people with sick minds who get off on torture and other abnormal things go searching for these red doors. and when they find them, they put great amounts of money just to control the show. The shows are usually hosted by someone from the Middle Eastern portion of the world. It's always a dark-skinned person hosting the show with their faces covered by a cloth or a mask. The host always seemed to be in a pissed-off, demanding mood, and always seemed to be under the influence of some type of drug or booze. I'm gonna tell you of the experience I had once when going deep into the deep end of the web. Some of you may have heard of it, but can't get there. You can't get there using Tor. Tor is infested with law enforcement. Red doors won't show up on the Onion anymore like they used to. The only way you can get to see a red door show is through the shadow web. And to get to the shadow web, you need an anonymous server, which is called Skix. It's like the new Tor, but without the law enforcement. The cyber world is a much, much more cruel place nowadays. As a recently retired FBI agent who specialized in cyber crimes all around the world, I am here to share a story of what I saw from one of those last cases before I retired. The case was never closed and got passed to the agents who replaced me. This was 4 months ago. The complaint was lengthy and in detail described and mentioned many acts of torture beyond what I had seen in my time with the agency. The tipster had sent screenshots of what he or she had seen one night while digging deep into the deep web. They explained how they had been a regular on the deep web, but how everything was dying out due to law enforcement, and also explaining how they wanted to dig deeper, so they found the shadow web. The process of becoming a member of the shadow web was lengthy. The person claimed it took them up to 2 weeks before they were granted access after paying. Finally, the email they were expecting came in, and they were granted access after installing Skix. This was the new software/program that would allow them access to the shadow web servers. Little did they know what they were getting themselves into. I won't go into detail as to what they mention in their report because it's still under investigation. Due to the person being murdered in their own home by an unknown source. This is where I will mention my experience as part of my personal investigation. I was given a link to the shadow web by the recently deceased. With permission from the big head, I was able to sit down and proceed. I took the security precautions and paid the fee. It took the shadow web admin 2 days to send the email allowing me access. In the email, they prompted me to join as many as 4 live sessions that were going on throughout the week. One of them was called Shark Bait, another was called Shit Cereal. The other 2 are too gross to mention. The shadow web entrance that I was given a portal to led to about 10 other websites throughout the shadow web. The websites didn't have names. They were named by numbers in a 1 to 10 list. There were about 100 other websites on the bottom, but mainly were all under construction. On the main page, it showed the times and dates of the 4 shows that were going to be broadcasted live on the shadow web through a stream. There were archives that began in March of 2015 and ended in August 23rd. These archives were of previous live streams that had already happened. I decided to take a look. The one that I chose was called Salted Snail. I didn't really know what to expect before clicking it. Judging by the name, I thought there were going to be snails involved, but there weren't. I clicked the link and it took me to a brown page with an ad and the video behind the ad. The ad started with the clown laughing. Then he says, "Not so fast. You have to go through me before you can see what you came to see." He reminded me of Captain Spaulding. He had severed heads in the background. His face was painted and smeared. His clothes were splattered with bloodstains. In the ad, he encouraged viewers to come join one of the next sessions coming up and to pay the fee to see the fun unfold. He mentioned that the viewers were in charge, and that they had control of what happened to the sadistic victims. He then looked closely in the camera and said, "It's gonna be one hell of a show," and then the ad ended. The video was then available to play. The video was titled Salted Snail. The video just began and gave no credits. it just started. You see the clown again, walking out from behind a white curtain that looked like it had shit or blood smeared all over it with the light behind it. His face was painted, and he was naked. He walked out of the curtain chuckling to himself and smiling, scratching his ass and his balls. Then he walked towards the camera and shook his penis in front of the camera and announced how happy he was to see new members. He then went on a 30-second rant about law enforcement and how they can't catch him, and how he was in the US and how he lived next door to a state trooper, and how they will never catch him, thanking all his friends in China. I'm guessing those were the hackers who were keeping him anonymous. After his rant, he then said the show was scheduled to stream for 15 minutes, so he has to stick to a scheduled base because he was very, very hungry and hasn't eaten in the past 2 days. He then flashed his ribs at the camera. He wasn't that skinny. He then asked if everyone watching was ready for the show. A lot of people responding in the side chat box said yes. He then reminded everyone that he was in control for this show, not the viewers. He then chuckled and said, "I'll be right back." He went behind the curtain. He then rolled out a black barrel and placed it right in front of the camera. He then walked around the barrel, knocking all around it with his fist, as if knocking on a door. He then kicked it very hard with his heel. You can hear something in the barrel. He grabbed what seemed like a flathead screwdriver and pried open the barrel. You can see a head full of hair as the lid opens. A girl sitting there, alive. He then yells at her in Chinese to stand up. She can barely stand. Her body is so soggy from what I assume was water that she was in. He then looked at the camera and said, "Doesn't she look delicious? As delicious as cake." The girl had her hands tied behind her back in her mouth. She was bounded with multiple layers of cloth. She looked too weak to scream, too weak to escape or even attempt to do so. She just stood there, from what seems to be like as if she was accepting death. Then the clown went behind the curtain and came back out with a knife and a razor. He then got in front of the camera and said, "I love some Chinese food. It's dinner time." The girl then turned to him and looked at him, and he nodded at her and said, yes, it's time." Her eyes opened wide. She tried to scream but couldn't. He then teased her, poking at her with a knife. She began to bleed instantly from the poking. She was extremely soggy. Then he showed off the little razor blade and proceeded to cut little squares on her shoulder, as if cutting a piece of cake. Pretty soon, as he was at the other shoulder, then her chest, breast, and stomach, this scene was extremely gorish and violent, almost as if filleting a fish. By the time he was finished with her body, he had a plate filled with her skin and tissues, and the girl was still alive. Her body looked like it had been eaten by piranhas. The only thing remained were her breast, her face, and her hair. He then took the plate behind the curtain and brought out another plate. He then looks at the camera and says, "Well, look at that. Doesn't she look great?" As you can see, she may have lost a couple of pounds, huh? He then winked at the camera and laughed. He proceeded to cut off the girl's ears and lips. What looks now like a mutilated body that is still alive left me wondering what he had done to other people in the past. I was enraged and extremely disturbed by what I had seen. The finale showed the clown coming out of the curtain with 2 containers of salt. He then poured the salt all over her body where her skin had been cut off. He poured a good amount on her ears and lips too. The girl, suffering, hardly moved but still somewhat standing. He then looks at the camera and says, "I bet you motherfuckers thought I was gonna kill her, didn't you? But I'm not a murderer." He then pushed her head back down into the barrel and closed the lid. He then looked at the camera and said, "Stay tuned to the next episode." The camera then showed him putting a white tablecloth over the barrel and placing a plate of soggy flesh on the barrel. He then lit a candle, grabbed a fork and a knife, and pulled up a chair. The camera showed him there, eating the flesh while chuckling away and talking to himself. The screen then flooded with words, "Till the next episode," over and over with some circus music playing in the background. The camera then dimmed out as it showed him eating and laughing away. The black screen then showed the words, "offline." I immediately became concerned for the girl. She was Asian. The clown clearly looked American, or sounded American at least. He clearly resembled Captain Spaulding from The Devil's Rejects or House of a Thousand Corpses. I'm assuming that is what he was trying to be or act like. I contacted my chief and had a personal meeting with him and explained everything about what I had seen. He then laughed and said, "You've seen him, huh? That evil fucking clown on the internet? He's been around since the late 90s doing these shows. He seems to buy women off the markets and then tortures the shit out of them." He then shrugged his shoulders and said, "We don't know who he is or where he's located. The Chinese help him keep anonymous." To me, this was something new. As an agent who dealt with homicides and piracy, I had never encountered nor seen anything like this. I'm now retired, and I just thought I'd share this story with Reddit. Everyone should know the deep web is deep and free, but the shadow web, that is something you don't want to go to. This story is 100% real, and I don't care whether you believe me or not. It's about an experience I had going on the deep web. For those of you who don't know, the deep web is pretty much the hidden internet. It isn't indexed by search engines, and you need to know some special softwares to go on it. It is several thousand times bigger than the surface internet, which can be reached by Google, Yahoo, Bing, and everything else. It is also home to many illegal things. You can buy stolen guns, any drug you can imagine, stolen phones. You can even hire hitmen. Any illegal thing you can imagine is on the deep web. I never had a great childhood. My dad was gone all the time, and my mom was too. When she was home, it was normally verbal and physical abuse. I always needed to have a way to escape it all, whether it was playing video games, watching movies, or even drinking. One day I was invited over to a friend's house for a sleepover. When I got there, he immediately told me he had something to show me. We went upstairs, and he showed me his laptop. He said he had gotten onto the deep web. We stayed up till late that night, browsing through all the interesting things on it. He showed me how to use it, and I took some notes. The next day, I decided to try it out for myself. I downloaded the software and was good to go. When on the deep web, there's a page full of links in order to go to sites you can keep clicking on for new links that pop up. At first, it was very boring. Tons of dead websites or disgusting ones filled with videos of real people getting killed. Eventually, I found a forum. I can't remember what it was about, but I asked how to get any interesting sites that weren't illegal. One guy sent me a link and said it was a site that contained leaked government documents. I thought that was interesting, so I clicked on it. When I pulled up the page, I was pretty shocked. It was a whole bunch of videos of people getting tortured, raped, murdered, in the most horrible of ways. I have a pretty strong stomach, so I was ready to ignore it and just exit out. But I realized that all of the videos were playing at once. When I moved the mouse over one, there was no bar that let you pause or stop it. That's when it hit me. These were all thousands of live streams. I clicked on one that said homeless man kidnapped in my basement. In it, a man was tied to a chair, covered in blood. To his left was a table, and on it were a whole bunch of tools like axes, knives, drills, hammers. There was also a hooded man standing by it. On the right of the live stream, there was a chat box, and people were requesting the hooded man to do various things like cut off the homeless man's hands, rip out his hair, and many other horrifying requests. Eventually, one man in the chat box said that he would pay several bitcoins for the hooded man to gouge out the homeless man's eyes. The hooded man agreed and grabbed what looked like a fork off the table and began to walk over to the homeless man. I quickly closed the live stream, but I could still hear it. I tried to leave sight, but was frozen. I could only hear the horrible sounds coming from the stream. A few seconds later, the sound stopped, and a chat box appeared in the center of the screen. I couldn't exit out, but then in the box someone typed, "Hello, how'd you like the site?" I stayed frozen in place, but eventually typed in, "Who is this?" The guy explained that he was the owner of the site, and he liked to greet first-time users whenever he could. I got a disgusted look on my face, and this is where things got really scary. In the chat box, the man typed, "It's rude to make faces, Jake." My eyes got wide, and I noticed my webcam was on, when I always keep it off. Also, how did this man know my name? I covered up the webcam with a sticky note, and typed, "How do you know my name? I'm calling the police." There was a brief pause. Then horrifyingly, a bunch of data was posted in the box. I looked at it and realized that it was everything about me. My full name, my email, my address, even my age. It even had all my parents' info as well. I panicked and shut off my computer and hoped that it would be the end of that. I did a complete wipe of all my computer's data and went to get a drink. I was under a lot of stress. That night, my mom said she wouldn't be home. She didn't say where she was, but at this point in my life, I didn't care. My dad, of course, was nowhere to be seen. I couldn't sleep, so I stayed up watching a movie, and I fell asleep on the couch. I don't know why, but at 2:30 in the morning, I woke up. The TV was still on, and it gave off a dim light, but when I opened my eyes a little more, I almost screamed. There was a man standing just a few feet away from me, with the mask on. I flew off the couch and darted for the door. I heard heavy footsteps coming after me, and I flung open the door and ran outside, screaming as loud as I could, trying to get somebody's attention. I looked behind me and saw the man. He was running, and even faster than me. I screamed louder and noticed I had tears running down on my face. A bag then wrapped around my head, and I was pushed to the ground with such force that I felt blood in my mouth. I heard a car speed up beside me, and I was being dragged to the sound of it. They were taking me away, and probably I was going to end up on that site. I had almost accepted my death when the man with the mask screamed in pain and dropped me. I pulled the bag off my head and saw a van speed away, and I saw my neighbor hitting the masked man with a baseball bat. The police arrived soon after, took the masked man in, and eventually caught the van and shut down the site. My mom and I moved out, and I will never, ever go to the deep web ever again, and I encourage others to never go on it either. Edit. I should change the last part. I'm not against the deep web or Tor. The idea of an internet free from the government and that allows freedom of speech is perhaps the most incredible thing ever. What I meant to say was that if you do go on the deep web or Tor, be careful and be safe, and don't go randomly searching for websites. In my case, I wasn't careful. My friend wasn't certified to teach me how to use it, and I was very reckless in my use of it. Just be very careful when using it.